Hey, everybody, welcome back to Modern Solutions for Modern Restaurants. I'm Paul Molinari, your host. According to an Oracle sponsored study of over like 14,000 pros across 17 different countries, they found that 86% of business leaders say that the sheer volume of data has made decision making almost impossible, right? About 72% admitted that data overload prevented them from making any decisions at all. So think about that. These statistics align kind of directly with one of AI's core promises, untangling data overload, so that leaders can ultimately act with confidence. That's one of the wonderful things that we're hoping AI does for us. So I'm really excited to have our guest join me today to discuss what I like to call decision. Well, he likes to call it too, decision intelligence. And this is a topic or a concept that is, we believe, radically changing the way how the C-suite is making decisions about their businesses. So I have with us today Mike Lukianoff of Flare.ai. And he's a data scientist. And really, he's a data science pioneer and a serial entrepreneur with decades and decades of experience in restaurant analytics. His pricing and optimization tools have powered over 30 million price changes and are trusted by 60% of the top 100 US restaurant chains. Pretty good. He's founded Czar Metrics, introducing many of the industry's go to methods for pricing, promotion, and site selection. And after its acquisition by Symphony Technology Group, Mike served as chief analytics officer. So Flare AI, his third restaurant tech venture, and his current beautiful baby, is now focusing on helping brands make smarter, faster decisions through AI-driven insights and innovation. So, Mike, my friend, I'm so glad this is finally happening. Welcome to Modern Solutions for Modern Restaurants. How you doing, pal?
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here, and thanks for the great introduction.
Well, my pleasure. I've been an admirer from afar for a while. We did get to meet face to face a couple of months ago, which was great. But I enjoy the content, the thought leadership that you put out there. It's some of the most compelling stuff that I look forward to reading in our industry, because I know that what you're putting out there, I know you get the sense of how passionate you are about accuracy and answering big questions. You just that kind of just emanates off of the whole Signal Flare vibe. I love that. So keep making that great content. I mean, I don't know how you have time to do it, frankly, but that's awesome that you do. You know, so I wanted to kind of just start off with, what inspired the creation of Signal Flare? I know this is your third venture into restaurant tech space. So, what are you trying to address specifically in the restaurant industry with Signal Flare?
Yeah, no, I think like a lot of things, it was inspired by maybe not by, but in the pandemic. I had sold my last company to which then was sold to Symphony, as you had mentioned, and then I exited. And right around 2020, I started doing some consulting in analytics again. And you know, among the many things that happened in the pandemic, one of them was that a lot of the old models that we would use, that were primarily linear models that depended on some period of stable demand pattern, they stopped working because everything changed about demand patterns, about consumer behavior, even about how people navigated their trade areas. So whether you were doing pricing models or promotional models, or you know anything that you were doing to analyze data, just completely fell apart.
Yeah.
Um, but people were still coming to me and saying, "Well, you know, surely there's something that you can do to help us understand, you know, what's going on or how to make a better decision with data." And I just had to really rethink everything about how I'd learned about how to use data over decades to make better decisions. And I had to take it from a completely different angle. And instead of starting in the past, we had taken the point of sale data and built models out of the consumer behavior, and then layered in things about, okay, well, who's coming into the restaurant now, and where are they coming from, and what's going on with the economic indicators, to then layer things on after we got into the consumer behavior. So I really turned that completely upside down, and I said, okay, well, what if we start with understanding who the consumers are, where they're coming from, as they're coming in. So I started pulling in mobile device data and credit card panel data and local economic data to see what kinds of things I could predict before I started pulling in the point of sale data, and even changed the mathematical models that I used so that I could actually use more of a probabilistic modeling, which is really the foundation of all AI models today. So because of the methodologies that I was using and the data sources, all of it really lent itself to this, what is now this massive AI revolution.
That's fantastic. So you were kind of on a path already. It's almost, it was, I guess, somewhat serendipitous that the methodologies and the way that you were trained as a data scientist kind of fell in line with how much abundance AI affords you, right? So you
Yeah.
had a very, how should I say, disciplined approach to data analysis, and AI in a lot of ways allowed you to really expand on that.
That's right. It was. I think if I hadn't, a lot of things sort of had to happen in a line for me to rethink everything that I'd learned before, and because I
Right.
had to rethink it from the bottom up, the methodologies that I used and the data sources, were completely, and even the technologies,
Yeah.
all of that, made me leave, the more traditional methods, start from scratch. And starting from scratch meant, being, what now would be called AI first.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought I read somewhere, and and maybe you can debunk this if this is wrong, but I thought I had read that the average restaurant might have like 25,000 data points in a day or something absurd, some kind of an absurd amount of data that's available on a daily basis. And when you think about it, restaurants are flooded with data from POS systems, delivery platforms, reviews, just data from everywhere. So which signals does pardon me, which sources does Signal Flare prioritize for decision making frame? Maybe you can explain sort of how does Signal Flare take all of these different data pieces and formulate, I don't know, a crystal ball?
Yeah, I think that's great because you sort of tapped into where Signal Flare came from, because that's exactly the root of it, right? Which is
Mm,
finding the signal in the noise. I spent so many years working with executives in corporate offices for restaurant companies, and the thing that kept on resonating, or I kept hearing from all of these CEOs, was, well, tell me the 40,000 foot view. you know and I had all these data points. They had 1,000 restaurants out there,
right.
spread out all across the country. And I'm going, well, you're asking for the 40,000 foot view. That's the easy one. But what I'm telling you is you've got 1,000 different businesses operating, with 1,000, 10,000 different things driving the business. And they're all shooting up these signal flares saying, look at me, I'm different, and that's where the
Right.
name came from, because they're all like, these flares are out there, right? These signals are in the data telling you, what's actually driving the business. You just need to be able to stop and look at it. You need to know what
And
to look
see
for.
them. I mean, that's part of it. That's so funny. It's that analogy, the Signal Flare analogy or metaphor, is so appropriate because it is about seeing it, right? What you're trying to do is help identify what those signals are, because as you mentioned, they're there. But how do you get that to kind of to break through the noise? The signal to noise ratio that we
Right.
always talk about.
It's funny, Paul, because going back in time, and as you said, right, I've been helping people use data, to make decisions for a very long time. And early in my career, I had to convince people that it mattered, right, that they should actually use data to make a decision. And there was a lot of resistance with that. How can you tell me with data, what I don't already know? Which is funny, right? That's not the paradigm at all anymore. But then it started to sort of shift, which is the drunk and the light post analogy, right? Which is,
Okay.
am I using the light post uh, for support or for illumination, right? And more often than not, I was being called in because somebody had wanted me to prove something with the data that they already believed.
Well, but isn't that a great thing too? I mean, to kind of you have a hypothesis, and rather than just completely operate on your gut, now you have a resource, like a signal flare that can actually help, prove a hypothesis. Uh, you know, uh, and that's kind of the way I think traditionally the way that most restaurants have always been acting. They're going to ultimately act on a hunch because generally speaking, as you mentioned, there's data coming from everywhere. It's hard to parse through. It's really hard to understand what's real, what's the truth. So on that, how does your platform or decision intelligence platforms in general, really, how do you turn raw restaurant data, whether it be guest feedback or sales reports or, P&Ls, all of these different data ingredients into actionable insights. How do you convert all of that data into an insight? Are there dashboards? Are there prescriptive reports that come out? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it all starts with what I call data unification. So,
Okay.
most organizations that are data centric, they're still getting their data through maybe five, six, seven, 10 different dashboards
Hmm.
that aren't necessarily bringing all of these different data sources into one central repository where they then come together and can give you some harmonized understanding of things. Right, there might be one out in HR and then something else that's in finance and something else that's in development, but to actually
Right.
bring that together and get an understanding to understand how development decisions are impacting finance, and in fact impacting culinary and guest satisfaction and all those kinds of things. It's unusual for all of those things to come in a regular data warehouse. There aren't that many companies that have that, and that is always the starting point for us, because our goal is to help to make a decision right in the last mile. So in order to help in the last mile, we've got to get the first mile right. So we always start with that data integration and the data blending. Then we create diagnostics, and those diagnostics are things, some of them are what I would call somewhat simple. Understanding, we're tracking 180 million mobile devices. We've got credit card panel data. We've got indicators. So
And
we're
these are all your overlays. These are not necessarily this is not data that's coming from the restaurant. These are, data sources that Signal Flare has
That's right.
your own relationships
Exactly.
with.
We're pre-compiling these so that before we bring in the point of sale data, we already have a really good foundation
Yep,
of understanding of all of those factors affecting every restaurant, and what's happening surrounding it. And even some of the simple things, Paul, like things people don't even sort of take, maybe they take for granted or don't realize are so difficult, is that you get your store list on a 100 unit chain. Your store codes are not easily mapped to your the same store codes that Yelp uses for your reviews, or
mhm,
that to put them on a Google map, or to match it to the census demographics, or to pull in any other commerce information. So we have all that mapping. So as soon as it uploads to our data, all of those sources are being mapped into our platform. So that's why we're able to identify things like, okay, well, now we know who your customers are who are coming into your restaurant. We know what sort of demographic profile there are of your restaurant, also of your surrounding community. So there's all this richness to it,
Yeah,
right out of the
it's
gates.
almost like I remember earlier in my career, we used to use a company or a product called Prism. Do you remember Prism data?
Yes, absolutely. Prism and
I
Mosaic, yes.
Prism and Mosaic. I love that stuff. I used to back in the day. I was the company's first digital marketing director. This is going back for a huge consumer electronics retailer called Tweeter. I think we had 175 stores across the country. Great, the iPod came along and killed everything, but that's a different story entirely. But we would love the data that we would get back from Prism. We'd send them all of our customer information, and they would come back with these rich reports of these different clusters of personas, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so in some essence, that's one of the things. I mean, there's so many things that you can do, but from a marketing perspective,
A-
you could utilize Signal Flare as a way to really understand who your customers are and treat them
And it's a
accordingly.
great analogy, right? Because it's also an important distinction because people still talk about, right, because Prism and Mosaic, those are psychographics. And I still hear a lot of people talking about psychographic data, which is, it's lifestyle. So so
Right.
I'll tell you, what magazines people are reading and these sort of things. But when we start pulling in the types of data that we're pulling in, is behavioral data. So it's, where did they actually go? How are they navigating? What other competitors did they visit? How much are they spending when they go and spend data in restaurants? So it's not this sort of generalized, cluster about people in general, right? Like,
Right.
they
Right.
have funny names like, urban cliff dwellers and
I remember
shotguns and
yeah, pickups and shotgun racks. I remember that kind
yeah,
of thing. It was like, holy
which is,
crap, it's hilarious.
marketers love them, right? But they're designed for how you create a commercial, right? But
That's
not
right.
not designed for how you target
So
people
give
in
me
a
an example
database.
So give me an example about how a restaurant company could better understand its customer using a signal flare, your decision making methodology there. I mean, what kind of data sources are you looking at? Where are you getting the data from the restaurant? What other types of things are you overlaying to create that picture?
So for a restaurant, take a restaurant that has a CDP, for instance, right? So we'll work with a lot of the different.
Like a Bicky or something like that?
Sure, right. So a Bicky or a fishbowl or a M
Blue
particle,
comic.
right? So
All right.
whatever, we're not a CDP. We work with a lot of the CDPs. If they already know, their customers and they know where their customers are, then we can overlay that, with the mobile data that we have. And the CDP is what I would call the in database customer that they already know. So that's an efficient customer for them to be able to market to, but it never expands their reach, right? It's only talking to the people who they already know are their customers.
Right, right.
What you also need to make sure that you can use that data and say, okay, I know that my current database customers live in these areas. We take the mobile data and we say, okay, well, here's where your competitors' customers live that overlap with you, and here's where your customers live, and here's also where they work. So we can tell you exactly where you want to be putting, your marketing spend very precisely geographically. So you don't have to go and buy a whole market. You can just buy neighborhoods, through digital. So instead of buying, huge swaths of demos, you can just buy, neighborhoods at, 2000, 2000 demos at a time, very precisely.
Right. So therefore, from even just from a media buying perspective, it's going to give the media buy team a much better and hopefully more accurate picture of where they should target, who they should target, where they should target.
That's
What
right.
about what about performance? Let's stay on the media analytics vein for a minute. how does your platform help restaurants understand the effectiveness of a particular campaign they ran or an LTO? How are marketers or how are restaurants using your system to demonstrate lift, for example?
Yeah. So for our customers where where we're pulling in their point of sale data, because we have a platform, so some of our customers are just accessing to use the mobile and the credit card and the economic data.
Yep,
Most of them are also giving us their point of sale data, and as that loads, we're able to do some attribution analytics. And when they also give us their marketing calendars and so forth, then we can actually track what attributes in their marketing or their surrounding community, and identify store by store what's actually driving the traffic changes.
that's wild. That's really cool stuff. I got to say, it's so much on the line now. There's always when you our industry, the margins are so tight, and it seems like every dollar spent has to show impact in some way. I would imagine that the number of use cases that Signal Flare has that can help that restaurants would identify with must be enormous. What are some of the reasons why brands are reaching out to you now specifically? Is it all about it can't all be about marketing. It has to be about what are some of the other things?
Yeah, the two biggest use cases for us have been, first has been pricing, because
Okay.
I've built a lot of pricing models over the years that have been used by so many of the large chains. And so I think when a lot of the folks that I worked with in the past had heard that I was building a better mousetrap, they were very interested. But and
So when you say pricing, you're talking specifically around dynamic pricing?
Not dynamic pricing. I mean, if somebody wanted to use our models for dynamic pricing, it certainly lends itself to it. But it's about price optimization and price
Okay.
elasticity. It's a decision system. So basically, we pull in all of the data. We know what the optimal price is for every product and every store and every time, and then we will make the recommendations on what the right prices are and what the right menu structures are, and then we'll simulate what the results are at different price points. So with enterprise restaurant companies, for instance, what I learned a long time ago about restaurants is that you can make recommendations, but they're never actually going to take them, right? They're going to take some modification of it. So the best you can do is make sure that they understand what the risk reward is. So you can say the best thing that you can do is take, a point in price, or you could say you
Okay.
shouldn't take any price at all. And they say, yeah, but you know what? I'm going to, it's going to be 2 points. So what I learned is that, look, I can tell you what the consequences of your actions are going to be, and I can do it within probability ranges. So when we built this system, we said, we're going to build this as a probabilistic model, so that whether you want to take a 1% price or a 10% price, we're going to tell you what the impact is going to be on your check average, on your customer counts, even on your.
This is like a full on flight simulator, if you will.
That's right. And what's been, I mean, I will say, I it has
By the way,
surprised me. It has
I,
surprised
please
me. Like,
take that name.
I knew what I was building, Paul, but I was
Yeah.
surprised at how accurate it has been in predicting what the actual impacts were.
That see, I love that. I mean, that's the crystal ball, right? We alluded to earlier. I mean, if you can make those kinds of predictions, like if to use your tool and say, guys, looking at next quarter's results, I think what we're going to have to do is raise our prices 10%. Oh, okay. Well, I guess we can do that. But wouldn't it be nice to know what's going to actually happen before you go ahead and just do it? Well, maybe you can do it. Maybe you can actually really kind of stretch the elasticity of it all and see, you know what? Maybe we can actually raise it 15%. Or maybe you find out that if you go past 8, you're in trouble.
Well, and that is what we're finding more and more, especially now, right? I think when at peak inflation, people were often not increasing their prices as much as they could, but then afterwards they continue to increase their prices by too much. And
Yeah.
what we were helping people to understand was that they thought they wanted to increase their prices by 3% and thought they were going to keep 3%. So they were saying, okay, I'm going to increase my prices by 3%. But we were saying, no, if you increase your prices by 3%, you're only going to keep a point and a half. But if you
Right.
increase your prices by 2%, you're actually going to keep 2%, because the 3% is putting you over these psychological barriers and so forth.
Right.
And the model is really playing it out, because what happens is that with regular price elasticity, you know the old models were really just showing, as you increase your prices, you're going down the same slope, right, just at a faster rate. The way that we've built the models is that we've got a full distribution. And this might be getting a little too technical, but if you increase your price too aggressively, then you're
Hmm.
actually going to a different slope on the elasticity. So if you get too aggressive, then it's actually going to kick in to show that you're going to lose more traffic, and
Well, there,
you're going to achieve less. You're going to create more trade down on your check.
this is actually. I'm glad you brought that up as an example, and how you said that you can see the curve. So let's talk a little bit about signal flare from. There's a visual side to signal flare, right? You're creating visuals. So within this simulator this crystal ball, users are able to see the reports and see an analysis. Is it dashboards? Is it all? Is there a prescriptive element to this, or are you giving out? Are you providing recommendations based upon the analysis that Signal Flare is doing? And how do you demonstrate that or visualize that for the user?
There is. So there's a couple of different, say, models. So there's a fully self-directed. So we have some clients who log in, they use the simulator themselves, and they decide what they're going to do, and the simulator will tell them what the impact is, and then they're on their own.
Yeah.
And most of our customers want our services team to help them with it as well. So they're taking our recommendations, and then they're using the simulator to say, well, I'd also like to see if these stores move to that tier, or what if we got super aggressive in this market and not in that one, and so forth. Usually I think, in restaurants, I think most people want a little bit of the hand holding. What we do is pretty technical. So having some, world class professional analysts, at the disposal of even small chains, I think that's a pretty big perk for a lot of restaurants that wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
have these folks, on their own teams.
Yeah, I love that. So there is two sides to the equation here. Of course, there's the computer horsepower, the monster that you've built that does all of the analytics, but then you also have the human side of this too, that can help construct the right questions, on behalf of the client, explain the analysis, provide the prescriptions or recommendations, if you will. I mean, so Signal Flare is not, you're not just providing a tool and saying, "Okay, prompt away, have a great day." There's an account executive. There's an account management element to the relationship.
That's right. And we have dashboards, and and the folks who use the dashboards, get really excited about the depth and the breadth of the data that they get. But, not everybody loves dashboards, right? Most people, really like, for the stuff to be, served up to them. We have that too, right? We spend a good amount of time just, helping, our executive teams putting together some board decks, right? To put it into, simple terms, not just
Right.
helping them, come up with what it is, but, how do I then communicate, that, hey, we did this the right way and with the right data, and
So I would imagine like an example of that might be how you're able to kind of strike the balance between those AI driven insights and the intuition of the restaurant operators to create things like, board decks, right? So if how can you help me, Mike? Explain to my board what's actually happening right now through some of these data analysis.
That's right. And a lot of, a lot of the, insights in the background and helping us to prepare some of those decks and so forth, you know, a lot of that stuff that's being generated by our internal analyst team, we're using that in the background, whether the customer knows it or not, right? Of course, we're vetting it, right, to make sure
Yep.
that it's all, it's all accurate and so forth. But it's a huge efficiency machine for us, that we wouldn't have been able to do for smaller customers that, that we can now do. What
Yeah.
we're working on now is that a lot of these, these tools and knowledge bases that our internal analysts are using, we're going to be launching an agent platform this fall that will be customer facing, so that our customers will be able to access that directly and have the power of these knowledge bases themselves.
Oh, fantastic. That's pretty cool. So that's on your roadmap, I guess.
That's right. Yeah.
Excellent. Hey, so all right, let's get as we're coming up on time here. I want to get to brass tacks and talk a little bit about ROI. You know, when you're engaged with restaurant brands, and your clients are going to tend to be on the enterprise side, I'd imagine. What kind of ROI or efficiency gains, have these enterprise class restaurants seen after implementing a signal flare solution or analysis?
Yeah. For the past, and not just signal flare, right? But one of the reasons why, the what I would say the tip of the spear has been price optimization, because
Yep.
that we do better than anybody else, right? We
Sure.
know that, that's a high, what I would say, a high value question, right? It's high impact because if you get it wrong, there's big downside, and if you get it right, there's significant upside, and is measurable, right? Time and time again, over decades, we know that if you're just doing competitive benchmark pricing, or if you're doing cost based pricing, um, the flow through that you get on your pricing is much lower than if you're using some, an elasticity based or econometric, right, or a more sophisticated way. What we're finding is that, the the way that we're doing it now is even more efficient and accurate than the prior methods that I used to use. And the ROI tends to be anywhere from 7 to 10 times the investment,
Yeah.
easily, just for the pricing. And then there's all the other things that that they get out of it as well that we're not even quantifying. For
Right, but in some instances, you kind of alluded to this earlier with regard to, for all intents and purposes, you're joining their team as their data science group.
Yeah,
I mean, that in and of itself has to be a massive contribution and also potentially a huge cost savings to them just from a headcount perspective.
absolutely. The other thing, there's also, Paul, the, how do you quantify what you help somebody not do, right? Which for me, that's those are the things that I'm the most proud of, right? Because I've seen time and time again, and we have seen it in test, right? Test and control, where
Yeah,
the customer will actually do, their more aggressive pricing, and we'll do something that, and maybe it's, I say it's more aggressive. It may be targeting the same price, but it's doing it in a much different way, maybe with products, with with stores, with regions. And we over and over again will see that we will get twice the flow through that that the other way will get, and with little to no traffic loss, right? And I think those are the ones that are meaningful to me, right? Is when talk somebody off the ledge of being too aggressive with their prices in a way that we know is going to really hurt the business, right? Those are the harder case studies to prove the ROI on. But we've seen people after the fact, right, who did something with pricing, made a bad mistake, and then they came to us for help. And
yeah.
that's hard to dig out. We help, right? We do, but boy, it's much better to get it on the other side.
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. It's yeah. Again, I just kind of I keep going back mentally to this idea of this flight simulator where you can get the answers to the test, so to speak, before you you know before you go take the test. I love that. I mean, I would imagine that has to be so incredibly powerful for these restaurant groups. What about, you know, you also alluded to this earlier, this model where you are data as a service, software as a service, and expertise, professional services. This kind of three legs of the signal flare stool. How does how do you implement, Mike? I mean, you get a party you get a restaurant brand that's interested in working with you. I mean, as you mentioned it, I think a little bit earlier ago, you need access to their data sources, and what if their data is crap? What if it's all unstructured? What if it's in a giant data lake? I mean, you're working with Snowflake and Databricks. I mean,
Yeah.
how does all that work?
Yeah, and and that's one of the reasons, Paul, why when I started Signal Flare, I pre-sourced all of this data because, in prior life, you know, being 100% dependent on the customer's data, you never know what they're going to have.
Yeah,
So it was always like, I don't know, maybe in 12 weeks, right? Maybe, in 6 months, we're going to be able to tell you something.
yeah,
Now I know that, worst case scenario, I'm 2 weeks from having some value for you, right? I can tell you something
absolutely. I mean,
about
you
your
grab
business.
the POS data, and with all that other stuff you're overlaying, you're already way ahead of the game.
Exactly. So even if we're going to take in your point of sale data, we're going to bring in your CDP data, we're going to bring in all of these other data sets, we know that we're already off to the races, by starting you up, get you into our demand dynamics, platform, give you some insights about your customer and your system, and start layering in the other data sets. And for our long-term customers, that's progressive, right? No matter where you are on that continuum, there's
Yeah,
additional data sets that you can start layering in. And for some of those that even have a really robust data warehouse, we are now integrating the full unstructured database with a document repository, because as we start to integrate the AI agents, it's going to be using both, right? So it's going to be analyzing the full document repository of your knowledge base, along with the structured data. That's the next phase that people need to start getting ready for.
fantastic. Mike, this has been awesome. Where are we going to see you next?
Scotland. I'm going on vacation next week.
Oh, fantastic. Oh my god, that's so funny. I was just in Scotland, about 2 months ago. I was with my family, we were in Edinburgh. Where are you going?
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Family vacation. Same thing. We're going to be in Edinburgh and up in the Highlands, Isle of Skye. So, yeah, really looking forward to that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fantastic. If you get a chance, my daughter was studying abroad in London, and my we had already been to London, so we were like, "You gotta get your ass up to Edinburgh. We'll meet you up there. We're gonna do something different." And we ended up if you can do this, I highly recommend it. We booked some time at this, estate called Glen Eagles,
Okay.
and it was in the Scottish Highlands, so we rented a car from Edinburgh and went up to the and we did skeet shooting, and we did falconry, where we had these giant, beautiful birds going out and hunting with it. We were walking through the woods with these falcon it was
Oh, wow.
absolutely insane. Only in Scotland, man. It was just so cool.
All
It was
right.
just so
I
cool.
think I'm going to look for that falconry. I think we signed up
Falconry.
for mushroom foraging. So,
I like that. Okay. I can get into that.
yeah.
All right. Good stuff, pal. We're gonna see you at FS Tech or any place, like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I'm doing the whole fall circuit.
The big
Yeah,
tour. I'll see you there.
yeah, yeah.
I'll see you there. All right, buddy. It's always a pleasure
Yeah.
talking to you, and have a great vacation.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on. It's great chatting as always.
Absolutely. Ciao.
Take care.